Amelia Green sat across from Anthony Collins, a powerful and wealthy businessman. The room was silent, except for the soft scratching of Anthony's pen against paper, as though her presence didn't even warrant his attention. The leather chair beneath her was cold, and the tension in the air felt stifling as he continued without so much as a glance her way. Finally, Anthony set his pen down, looked up, and met her gaze with the same cool, calculated expression she had come to know so well. "Amelia," he began, his voice calm but distant, "I assume this isn't about work?" Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times in her head, but sitting here in front of him now, she felt her voice caught in her throat. Swallowing hard, she forced herself to speak. "No, it's not about work." Her voice was soft as she glanced down at her tightly clasped hands. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Anthony didn't react, didn't move. It was as though he hadn't heard her at all. Seconds stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Finally, he raised an eyebrow, his expression as unfeeling as ever. "I see." That was it. Just those two words. Amelia felt a rush of disbelief and frustration. Her heart still raced as she struggled to keep her composure. "It's yours, Anthony," she continued, her voice wavering. "I thought you should know." Anthony let out a sigh, leaning back in his chair, his eyes chillingly detached. "Amelia," he said, his tone flat, "this is unfortunate." Amelia's mouth dropped open slightly, a wave of shock washing over her. "Unfortunate?" she repeated, her voice shaking in disbelief. He nodded, meeting her eyes with a gaze as cold as ice. "Yes, unfortunate. You should have been more careful." Her stomach twisted painfully. "We were careful," she insisted, barely able to keep her anger in check. "Apparently not careful enough," he replied, his words piercing through her like a knife. He leaned back, his expression hardening. "So you're telling me this because you expect me to do something about it?" Amelia's throat tightened. She hadn't thought this far ahead, hadn't anticipated him being so indifferent. "I just thought you'd want to know, so we could figure something out." His face turned stony, as though her words had crossed a line. "Figure something out? Amelia, you know how these things go. I have a family and a reputation. What happened between us was never meant to be anything more than that. A passing affair." Each word hit her like a slap, and she felt a sudden, hollow emptiness settle in her chest. She realized she had been a fool, letting herself believe it had been something more than what it was to him. She straightened her posture, finding the last shred of courage she could muster. "I'm keeping the baby, Anthony." Anthony let out a deep sigh and rose from his chair, coming around to stand in front of her. He looked down, his gaze sharp. "I can't be involved in this, Amelia. You understand that, don't you? As far as I'm concerned, this conversation never happened." A chill ran through her veins. "What? You're just walking away? Like it's nothing?" "I have to," he replied, his voice unyielding. "And you should too." Amelia rose to her feet, anger beginning to spark within her. "I can't just walk away, Anthony. This is your child too." Anthony's jaw clenched and his expression darkened. "Amelia, I'm warning you, let this go. I've taken care of you, but if you make this a problem, I'll make sure you regret it." Her heart sank, fear and anger swirling inside her. "What are you saying?" He didn't answer right away. Returning to his desk, he sat down, his face as cold as ever. "I'm saying that today will be your last day at Collins Enterprises," he said with a chilling finality. "I've already spoken to HR. You'll receive a severance package, of course, but after today, you're no longer employed here." The words were like a punch to the gut. "You're firing me because I'm pregnant with your child? I'm protecting my family, Amelia, and you should protect yourself." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "If you try to come after me, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." Amelia's hands shook, a mix of fury and helplessness rising within her. She stared at the man she had once trusted, now looking at her like she was a threat. She blinked back the tears that blurred her vision. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, every step carrying her away from the future she had once thought was hers. Bookmark go back. Amelia stepped out of Collins Enterprises with her bag slung over her shoulder, each step feeling heavier than the last. The reality of what had just happened hit her with full force as she moved through the bustling city streets. Only hours earlier, She'd had a promising career, stability, and a future she'd worked so hard to build. Now in an instant, everything was gone, all because of him. The streets were alive with people rushing about their day, each stranger with their own purpose, unaware of her inner turmoil. She lifted her head, fighting the tears threatening to escape, refusing to let the pain consume her. She felt a surge of determination. If Anthony had intended to break her spirit, he'd soon realize she was stronger than he could imagine. The elevator ride to the building's ground floor had been a test of her willpower, forcing herself not to break down in front of others. She caught her reflection in the polished elevator walls, her expression one of raw resilience. As she stepped outside, her composure began to waver, but she kept moving, step by step, as if each stride would put more distance between her and the memory of that office. Once she was finally alone on the crowded city street, the magnitude of her situation began to settle in. She was alone, jobless, and pregnant with no support and nowhere to turn. Anthony's voice echoed in her mind, his icy threat replaying over and over. "If you make this a problem, I'll make sure you regret it." A chill ran down her spine. She knew him well enough to realize he wasn't bluffing. Anthony was the kind of man who got what he wanted, no matter the cost. The realization left her feeling vulnerable, but then she placed a hand on her stomach, feeling a new fierce resolve growing within her. "I'm going to protect us," she whispered softly to herself as if speaking directly to her unborn child. "No matter what, we'll be okay." In the weeks that followed, Amelia threw herself into finding new work. Each morning, she polished her resume, rehearsed her interview responses, and submitted job applications to every firm and office in the city. Her skills were sharp, her experience solid, and she was confident that she would soon land another role. But, time and again, she encountered silence or vague rejections. Days stretched into weeks, and still, no opportunities materialized. After a while, she began noticing an unsettling pattern. Interviews that seemed promising would suddenly fall through without explanation. Potential employers who had once sounded enthusiastic would turn cold and distant with no warning. Suspicion crept in, and soon enough, Amelia realized the truth. Anthony had kept his promise. He'd blacklisted her, poisoning her reputation in the industry she had once thrived in. One particular afternoon, Amelia found herself in the lobby of a company she'd hoped would finally offer her a fresh start. She had completed a stellar interview just days before, but the HR manager now sat before her with a forced smile and a too-quick excuse. "I'm sorry, Amelia, but we've decided to go in a different direction," he said, barely meeting her eyes. She thanked him politely, her throat tight with frustration, and left the building with her head held high. But inside, she felt the cracks deepening. How many more doors would be closed to her because of Anthony's influence? Her savings dwindled as the weeks passed, and Amelia found herself forced to cut back, budgeting every dollar and stretching meals to last as long as possible. Every evening, she would return to her small, dim apartment, her spirits heavy. She would set her bag down, take a deep breath, and remind herself of her purpose. Her hand often resting protectively over her stomach. Her unborn child became her strength, the very reason she kept pushing forward despite the odds. But as the days passed, exhaustion began to settle in. There were nights when, alone in the silence of her tiny apartment, Amelia allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she was carrying. She would sit on the edge of her bed, hands cradling her stomach, speaking softly to her child. "I know it's hard right now," she would murmur, her voice breaking, "but I promise, I'm going to make a life for us. We'll find a way." Despite the setbacks, Amelia's resolve only strengthened. She spent her mornings at job interviews, afternoons at the local library researching opportunities, and evenings taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. Babysitting, dog walking, helping neighbors with errands, whatever would bring in just enough to keep the bills paid. Though the work was tiring, she took pride in knowing she was doing all she could. One rainy afternoon, after another discouraging interview, she returned to her apartment soaked to the skin. She collapsed onto her worn sofa, the tears she'd held back finally spilling over. She allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, letting out all the frustration and helplessness she'd been carrying. But as she wiped her tears, she looked down at her belly, feeling a renewed strength. She wouldn't let Anthony or anyone else steal her future. From that day on, Amelia's determination became unwavering. No matter how many setbacks or closed doors she encountered, she would press on. For her child's sake, she refused to let bitterness take root. She would find a way to build a new life, even if she had to start from scratch. Months turned into years, and Amelia's life transformed as she prepared for and then embraced motherhood. She brought her son Jamal into the world in the midst of financial struggles and uncertainty, yet holding him for the first time brought her a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. His tiny hand gripping her finger, his gentle breaths against her chest, Jamal became her whole world. Life as a single mother wasn't easy. Amelia worked every job she could find, from cleaning offices to late-night shifts at local diners, anything that would pay enough to keep a roof over their heads. Days were long, and nights often felt even longer, especially when she would collapse into bed, exhausted, only to wake up hours later to the sound of Jamal crying. But even as she lay there, fatigue weighing on her like a heavy blanket, she would remind herself of the promise she had made to him and to herself. Her small apartment was modest, furnished with second-hand items she had carefully chosen to make it feel like home. The walls were decorated with pictures she had taken of Jamal, marking his milestones, his first toothless grin, his first steps, and later his first wobbly attempt to ride a bike. With each small victory, Amelia felt a surge of pride. She was building a life for them, and even though it wasn't the life she had once envisioned, it was filled with love and resilience. Amelia also became fiercely resourceful. She found a supportive community in her neighborhood, neighbors who offered to watch Jamal while she worked, local mothers who swapped clothes and baby items, and teachers who gave Jamal extra help at school. She learned to stretch every dollar, budgeting meticulously, and finding joy in simple moments with Jamal, like walks to the park or reading books from the library. Her determination to create a stable life for him remained steadfast, even when the challenges seemed insurmountable. One evening, after another long day, Amelia tucked Jamal into bed and stayed by his side until he fell asleep, his small hand wrapped around hers. She watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with love. In his peaceful face, she saw all the possibilities she had fought so hard to keep alive for him. As she quietly left his room, she thought about how far they'd come. She had wanted to build a different kind of future, one where she could stand proudly in her career, unburdened by Anthony's shadow. But now, with every little victory Jamal achieved, she realized that her purpose went beyond proving herself professionally. Her purpose was to give Jamal a life filled with love, strength, and hope. Over the years, Amelia noticed Jamal's intelligence and curiosity growing. He was a bright child, quick to learn and eager to understand the world around him. Teachers often remarked on his potential, and he quickly became known for his academic excellence. Amelia beamed with pride each time he brought home a glowing report card or an award. She often stayed up late after he went to bed, researching ways to support his education, looking up scholarships, and finding programs that would challenge him. Despite her joy in his accomplishments, there were times when Jamal would ask questions about his father. At first, he was young and curious, just wondering why other kids had fathers who attended their school events or played catch in the yard. Amelia would tell him that their family was special, just the two of them, and that she would always be there for him. Yet as he grew older, Jamal's questions became harder to answer. He wanted to know more about who his father was, what he did, and why he wasn't there. One evening, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, fiddling with a pencil as he looked down at his homework. He hesitated for a moment before finally asking, "Mom, do you think my dad ever thinks about me?" Amelia's heart ached at his question, and she took a steadying breath. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jamal," she began gently, "sometimes life doesn't go the way we plan, and sometimes people aren't ready for the things that come their way. But you have everything you need to be amazing, and I am so proud of the person you're becoming." Jamal nodded slowly, accepting her answer, though she could see the lingering questions in his eyes. Amelia knew that one day he would need to hear the full story, and she only hoped he would be ready when that time came. Until then, She poured all her love and support into him, focusing on giving him a childhood filled with warmth and resilience. Years passed, and Jamal grew into a determined young man with dreams of his own. Amelia's heart swelled each time he spoke of his ambitions, and she continued to work hard, saving every extra dollar to help him reach his goals. She knew the day was coming when he would leave for college, when he would take his first steps into the world she had fought so hard to prepare him for. Despite everything that had happened, Amelia felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Anthony may have taken her career and her stability, but he hadn't taken her hope or her strength. She had built a life filled with purpose and love, and she knew that no amount of power or wealth could erase that. In her eyes, every challenge they had faced together, every sacrifice she had made, was worth it. As she watched Jamal's dreams take shape, she saw in him the legacy she was truly proud of, a legacy built on resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. The years seemed to fly by, and soon Jamal was ready to take his first steps into the professional world. After graduating with honors from college, he secured an internship at one of the top firms in the city, Collins Industries, a prestigious company known for its rigorous standards and elite reputation. Jamal was thrilled, unaware of the complicated history that tied him to the very place he was about to enter. The morning of his first day, Jamal dressed carefully, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror with a mixture of pride and excitement. He could hear his mother, Amelia, bustling in the kitchen, preparing his favorite breakfast. She had been his biggest supporter throughout his journey, always encouraging him to aim high. Today was as much a milestone for her as it was for him. As he entered the kitchen, Amelia looked up with a proud smile, but he noticed a shadow of worry in her eyes. "How do I look, Mom?" Jamal asked with a grin, spinning around to show off his suit. "First day at Collins Industries. This is big, right?" Amelia's smile faltered slightly, though she nodded, her hands tightening around her coffee mug. "Yes, baby, it's big," she replied softly. Her gaze drifted to the window, and he could see the unease behind her supportive expression. He noticed the change in her demeanor and sat down across from her, eyebrows furrowed. "Are you okay, Mom? You don't seem as excited as I thought you'd be." Amelia hesitated, the memories of her past struggles and pain momentarily flashing across her face. She looked down, gathering her thoughts before responding. "I am proud of you, Jamal. So proud. She trailed off, taking a deep breath. "I want you to be careful there." Confused, Jamal pressed on. "Careful? Mom, this is Collins Industries. They're one of the best in the country. This is my chance to make something of myself." "I know, honey," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes still avoiding his. "But some places, they aren't what they seem." Jamal tried to understand her sudden caution, but he couldn't see past the excitement of his new opportunity. "Mom, this is what we worked for, what you worked for, and I'm not going to let anything stop me now." Amelia looked at him with a mix of pride and trepidation. She knew he was right, that he was old enough to make his own decisions and strong enough to handle the challenges. Still, a nagging fear gnawed at her, one she couldn't put into words. She didn't want the truth of his father's betrayal to overshadow his dreams, but the knowledge weighed heavily on her. Finally, she forced a smile, though her voice held a note of caution. "Just remember, Jamal, not everything is as perfect as it seems on the outside. Trust your instincts, and don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." He softened, sensing her concern, and nodded. "I promise, Mom, I'll be careful." With a final hug and a wave, Jamal headed out the door, excitement surging through him. As he stepped onto the subway, he thought about his mother's warning, her words lingering in the back of his mind. But as he drew closer to the sleek glass tower of Collins Industries, those worries faded, replaced by the thrill of this new chapter in his life. Upon arriving at the company, Jamal was greeted by his supervisor, Miss Robinson, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who led him through the maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices. The environment buzzed with energy and focus. Everyone around him seemed intent on making an impression, a fact that only fueled Jamal's determination. As they made their way through the office, Jamal couldn't help but notice a group of senior executives gathered near one of the corner offices. He caught a glimpse of a man who seemed to command respect effortlessly. Richard Collins, the CEO himself. The older man was tall, with silver-streaked hair and a presence that was both intimidating and charismatic. Jamal had read about him before. Richard was renowned for building the company from scratch, turning it into the powerhouse it is today. To Jamal's surprise, Richard's gaze flicked toward him briefly, their eyes meeting for just a moment. Jamal felt an inexplicable sensation, like a jolt of recognition, though he brushed it off as nerves. Richard's face remained unreadable as he quickly turned his attention back to his colleagues. But that momentary connection left Jamal feeling unsettled, the sense of being seen and yet unseen lingering in his thoughts. As he reached his desk, Jamal shook off the strange feeling and focused on the tasks ahead. He was here to prove himself, to earn his place in this high-stakes environment. Yet, every now and then, his thoughts drifted back to that fleeting encounter with Richard, unable to shake the feeling that something more lay beneath the surface. The first day passed in a blur of introductions, reports, and new protocols. By the time the clock struck 5, Jamal was exhausted but exhilarated. As he packed up to leave, Ms. Robinson approached him with a brief smile. "Good work today, Jamal. Mr. Hay, Collins would like to see you in his office tomorrow morning at 9. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The CEO wanted to meet with him. On his first day? He couldn't contain his excitement, nodding quickly. "Thank you, Miss Robinson. I'll be ready." That night, Jamal returned home filled with stories of his first day, but he left out the part about meeting Richard Collins, knowing it would worry his mother. Amelia listened intently, her face lighting up with pride, though a flicker of worry remained in her eyes. She hugged him tightly before he went to bed, her silent prayer following him long after he drifted off to sleep. As she stood in the quiet kitchen, Amelia's mind raced. She had always known that someday, Jamal might come face to face with his father, but she hadn't expected it to happen like this. Now, as the truth edged closer, she could only hope he would be ready to face the shadows lurking behind the polished exterior of Collins Industries. The next morning, Jamal arrived at Collins Industries early, his mind buzzing with anticipation for his meeting with the CEO, Richard Collins. The excitement was tinged with nerves, but he reminded himself of all he had accomplished to get here. This was his chance to make an impression, and he wouldn't let anything shake his focus. When the clock struck 9, Jamal made his way to the executive floor, where the atmosphere was vastly different from the bustling main office below. Here, everything was sleek and polished, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a panoramic view of the city. He took a deep breath as he approached the receptionist, who gave him a professional nod and gestured toward the large mahogany doors. "He's expecting you. Go right in." Jamal steadied himself and stepped through the doors into the spacious office. Richard Collins sat behind an imposing desk, glancing over some papers. For a moment, Jamal felt small in the grand room with its sweeping views and elegant decor. He waited patiently, standing by the door, until Richard finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Come in, Jamal," Richard said in a calm, steady voice. "Have a seat." Jamal nodded and crossed the room, taking a seat in the leather chair across from Richard's desk. He met Richard's gaze, doing his best to project confidence, though his heart raced in his chest. Richard studied him for a moment, his eyes sharp and calculating. "So," he began, leaning back slightly, "how was your first day?" "Good, sir," Jamal replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm eager to learn and contribute however I can." Richard nodded slowly, though his gaze didn't soften. "That's good to hear. We expect a lot from our new hires here at Collins Industries. This is a place where only the best rise to the top." "Understood, sir. I'm ready to work hard." There was a pause as Richard continued to observe him as if searching for something. "Jamal Grant, is it?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes intense. "Yes, sir. Jamal Grant," Jamal replied, sensing a shift in the conversation. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, the intensity in his gaze deepening. "Interesting. Grant is a strong name. It reminds me of someone I once knew." Jamal felt his stomach twist slightly at Richard's words. There was something about the way Richard was looking at him that made him uneasy, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. "It's a pretty common name," he replied, hoping to deflect the strange sense of scrutiny. Richard held his gaze a moment longer, then leaned back in his chair, folding his hands thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose it is. His voice was calm, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that hinted at a deeper curiosity. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the room pressing down on Jamal. Then, Richard spoke again, his tone carefully controlled. I like to keep an eye on promising talent, Jamal. I see potential in you. Make sure you live up to it. Thank you, Mr. Collins. I won't let you down, Jamal replied, feeling both relieved and unsettled by the conversation. He stood up, ready to leave. Richard gave a curt nod, his gaze returning to the papers on his desk. Good, you may return to your duties. Jamal turned to go, but just as his hand touched the door handle, Richard's voice stopped him. Oh, and Jamal, Richard said, his voice as composed as ever, yet there was a note of something Jamal couldn't quite place. If you ever need anything, my door is always open. Jamal swallowed, forcing a polite smile. Thank you, sir. I'll keep that in mind. He exited the office, the unsettling feeling lingering in his chest as he made his way back to his department. Back at his desk, Jamal struggled to shake off the strange tension from his meeting with Richard. There had been something almost too intense about the way Richard had looked at him, something that felt personal. Though he couldn't explain why, he reminded himself it was probably just nerves. After all, meeting the CEO on his second day was no small matter. But as he settled into his work, Amelia's words from the day before echoed in his mind. Not everything is what it seems. Her warning had been vague, but something about it now made him wonder if she had known more than she let on. As the day wore on, Jamal poured himself into his assignments, determined to prove himself. Yet every now and then, his mind wandered back to his meeting with Richard, and that inexplicable sense of recognition he had felt when their eyes met. He dismissed it as first-day jitters, but the thought lingered, refusing to let him focus entirely. That evening, as he returned home, Amelia was waiting for him at the kitchen table. She had prepared his favorite meal and greeted him with a warm smile, though he noticed the faint line of worry in her brow. So, how was your day? She asked, watching him carefully. It went well, he replied, keeping his tone light as he sat down. Actually, I met Mr. Collins today. He called me to his office. Amelia's expression froze for a moment, the color draining from her face. You met him? Jamal nodded, surprised by her reaction. Yeah, I'm not sure why he wanted to meet me on my first day, but he just asked about my background and talked about the company. It was a little strange, honestly. Amelia looked away, a mixture of fear and sadness crossing her face. She took a deep breath before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. Jamal, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. Jamal's heart began to pound as he saw the seriousness in her eyes. What is it, Mom? Amelia hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. She looked up at him, her voice shaky but resolute. Richard Collins, he's not just your boss, Jamal. He's your father. Jamal's world shifted at that moment, his mother's words echoing in his mind. Richard Collins, the man he had admired, the CEO who had just looked him in the eye, was his father, the same man who had abandoned them all those years ago. Jamal sat frozen, his mother's words echoing in his mind. Richard Collins, your father. The revelation felt like a blow to the chest, and for a moment he couldn't find his voice. He stared at Amelia, trying to process the fact that the CEO he had just met, the man he'd admired from afar, was his father. The same man who had abandoned him before he was even born. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice trembling with disbelief. That can't be true, Mom. You never told me who my father was. You always said he was just someone who left. I didn't know he was. Amelia's eyes filled with sorrow as she nodded, her gaze never leaving his. I know, Jamal. I kept it from you because I didn't want you to grow up with that pain. I didn't want you to feel rejected or angry at a man who never wanted to be a part of our lives. Jamal's mind raced, replaying every conversation he'd had with Richard Collins earlier that day. The way Richard had looked at him, that flicker of recognition he couldn't explain, it all made sense now. He had felt that connection without understanding why. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as a wave of anger and hurt washed over him. So, he knew about me? He knew and still just walked away? Amelia's shoulders slumped as she nodded slowly. Yes, he knew. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it clear he wanted no part of it. And when I refused to give you up, he fired me. Blacklisted me, actually. I couldn't get work anywhere in the industry after that. Her voice broke slightly, but she quickly steadied herself, determined to tell him the truth. It wasn't just that he left us, Jamal. He made sure we had nothing and did everything he could to make sure I wouldn't come back into his life. He destroyed everything. Jamal felt a surge of fury. The man he'd looked up to for years, the man who ran this prestigious company, had not only abandoned his mother, but actively worked to ruin her life. I can't believe this, Jamal muttered, his voice low but laced with anger. All these years, I've been working to get to where he is, admiring him, and he left us with nothing? Amelia reached out, gently taking his hand as he paced. Jamal, I know it's a lot to take in. I didn't tell you this to hurt you. I couldn't let you walk into that company, into his world, without knowing the truth. I didn't want you to get close to him only to be hurt again. Jamal pulled his hand away, his eyes blazing with anger. I deserve to know who he is, Mom. I deserve to know what kind of man he really is. His voice softened, a note of hurt creeping in. All these years, I've wondered about him, even asked you about him. You never told me the truth. Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes as she looked at her son, her voice barely a whisper. I know, Jamal, I know I kept it from you. But you were my whole world, and I didn't want him to poison that. I thought I was protecting you. Jamal's gaze dropped to the floor, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He felt betrayed and hurt, torn between anger and sorrow. So, he has no idea who I am. I'm just some random employee to him. Amelia nodded, her voice thick with sadness. He doesn't know, Jamal. He didn't recognize you. Jamal clenched his fists, his mind spinning. Well, he's going to know. I'm not going to let him keep pretending I don't exist. He abandoned us, destroyed your career, and walked away without a second thought. And now I'm supposed to just sit there working for him, like nothing happened? Amelia's face tightened with worry, and she placed a hand on his arm, her voice pleading. Jamal, please be careful. Richard is powerful. If you confront him, he could retaliate. I don't want you to suffer the way I did. Jamal took a deep breath, anger still simmering beneath the surface, but he softened at the sight of his mother's worried face. I'm not afraid of him, Mom. He can't do to me what he did to you. I won't let him. She sighed, her expression filled with both pride and concern. Just promise me, whatever you decide to do, you'll think carefully. Don't let anger cloud your judgment. You've come so far, Jamal. Don't let him pull you down. Jamal met her gaze, the anger in his eyes tempered by a new resolve. I promise, Mom. But I can't keep working for him like nothing happened. I need him to know what he did to us, what he put you through. He can't get away with this. Amelia nodded, understanding the determination in her son's eyes. She knew he had to confront his father, just as she had years ago. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, she said quietly, squeezing his hand. Jamal took a deep breath, steadying himself as he made his decision. He would confront Richard, not out of anger, but because he needed the truth to be known. He wouldn't let his father hide behind lies and wealth any longer. As he hugged his mother tightly, he felt a renewed strength, a purpose that went beyond proving himself professionally. This was about reclaiming the truth for himself and for Amelia. The next day, as Jamal stepped back into Collins Industries, he felt a wave of resolve wash over him. The polished glass walls and bustling office floor that had once filled him with awe now felt tainted, haunted by his father's betrayal. But Jamal was ready. He would face Richard Collins, armed with the truth and his mother's unwavering love. The time had come to confront the man who had abandoned him, and to finally reclaim the life his mother had fought so hard to protect. Jamal sat frozen, his mother's words echoing in his mind. Richard Collins, your father. The revelation felt like a blow to the chest, and for a moment he couldn't find his voice. He stared at Amelia, trying to process the fact that the CEO he had just met, the man he'd admired from afar, was his father. The same man who had abandoned him before he was even born. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice trembling with disbelief. That can't be true, Mom. You never told me who my father was. You always said he was just someone who left. I I didn't know he was. Amelia's eyes filled with sorrow as she nodded, her gaze never leaving his. I know, Jamal. I kept it from you because I didn't want you to grow up with that pain. I didn't want you to feel rejected or angry at a man who never wanted to be a part of our lives. Jamal's mind raced, replaying every conversation he'd had with Richard Collins earlier that day. The way Richard had looked at him, that flicker of recognition he couldn't explain, it all made sense now. He had felt that connection without understanding why. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as a wave of anger and hurt washed over him. So, he knew about me? He knew and still just walked away? Amelia's shoulders slumped as she nodded slowly. Yes, he knew. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it clear he wanted no part of it. And when I refused to give you up, he fired me. Blacklisted me, actually. I couldn't get work anywhere in the industry after that. Her voice broke slightly, but she quickly steadied herself, determined to tell him the truth. It wasn't just that he left us, Jamal. He made sure we had nothing and did everything he could to make sure I wouldn't come back into his life. He destroyed everything. Jamal felt a surge of fury. The man he'd looked up to for years, the man who ran this prestigious company, had not only abandoned his mother, but actively worked to ruin her life. I can't believe this, Jamal muttered, his voice low but laced with anger. All these years I've been working to get to where he is, admiring him, and he left us with nothing? Amelia reached out, gently taking his hand as he paced. Jamal, I know it's a lot to take in. I didn't tell you this to hurt you. I couldn't let you walk into that company, into his world, without knowing the truth. I didn't want you to get close to him only to be hurt again. Jamal pulled his hand away, his eyes blazing with anger. I deserve to know who he is, Mom. I deserve to know what kind of man he really is. His voice softened, a note of hurt creeping in. All these years, I've wondered about him, even asked you about him. You never told me the truth. Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes as she looked at her son, her voice barely a whisper. I know, Jamal. I know I kept it from you, but you were my whole world, and I didn't want him to poison that. I thought I was protecting you. Jamal's gaze dropped to the floor, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He felt betrayed and hurt, torn between anger and sorrow. So, he has no idea who I am. I'm just some random employee to him. Amelia nodded, her voice thick with sadness. He doesn't know, Jamal. He didn't recognize you. Jamal clenched his fists, his mind spinning. Well, he's going to know. I'm not going to let him keep pretending I don't exist. He abandoned us, destroyed your career, and walked away without a second thought. And now I'm supposed to just sit there, working for him, like nothing happened. Amelia's face tightened with worry, and she placed a hand on his arm, her voice pleading. Jamal, please be careful. Richard is powerful. If you confront him, he could retaliate. I don't want you to suffer the way I did. Jamal took a deep breath, anger still simmering beneath the surface, but he softened at the sight of his mother's worried face. I'm not afraid of him, Mom. He can't do to me what he did to you. I won't let him. She sighed, her expression filled with both pride and concern. Just promise me, whatever you decide to do, you'll think carefully. Don't let anger cloud your judgment. You've come so far, Jamal. Don't let him pull you down. Jamal met her gaze, the anger in his eyes tempered by a new resolve. I promise, Mom, but I can't keep working for him like nothing happened. I need him to know what he did to us, what he put you through. He can't get away with this. Amelia nodded, understanding the determination in her son's eyes. She knew he had to confront his father, just as she had years ago. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, she said quietly, squeezing his hand. Jamal took a deep breath, steadying himself as he made his decision. He would confront Richard, not out of anger, but because he needed the truth to be known. He wouldn't let his father hide behind lies and wealth any longer. As he hugged his mother tightly, he felt a renewed strength, a purpose that went beyond proving himself professionally. This was about reclaiming the truth for himself and for Amelia. The next day, as Jamal stepped back into Collins Industries, he felt a wave of resolve wash over him. The polished glass walls and bustling office floor that had once filled him with awe now felt tainted, haunted by his father's betrayal. But Jamal was ready. He would face Richard Collins, armed with the truth and his mother's unwavering love. The time had come to confront the man who had abandoned him, and to finally reclaim the life his mother had fought so hard to protect. Jamal's heart pounded as he rode the elevator up to the executive floor of Collins Industries, determined to face Richard Collins. The hallway outside Richard's office was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy with secrets. Taking a deep breath, Jamal steadied himself and walked toward the large mahogany door. The receptionist looked up, surprised to see him. "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Collins?" she asked. "No," Jamal replied, voice calm but resolute. "But he'll want to see me." The receptionist hesitated, noticing the intensity in his eyes. She pressed a button on the intercom, and Richard's voice soon crackled through, sounding calm and calm. With a nod, Jamal pushed open the doors and stepped inside. Richard sat behind his massive desk, the city skyline framing him from behind. He looked up with a neutral expression, gesturing for Ja. Jamal shook his head, choosing to remain standing. "I didn't come here for a business meeting, Richard," he began, voice firm. "I came to talk about the truth." Richard's brow furrowed slightly, though his gaze remained unreadable. "What truth are you referring to?" Jamal took a steadying breath, looking directly into his father's eyes. "The truth about you, about my mother and Haikniuj." For a moment, Richard's eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition, but he quickly masked it. "I don't know what you're getting at," he replied, his tone dismissive. "Yes, you do," Jamal retorted, his voice rising with anger. "You looked at me on my first day here and saw something you wanted to ignore. You thought I'd never say a word. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until you admit it." Richard's face hardened as he leaned forward, his voice low. "Careful, Jamal. Whatever you think you know, it's best you let it go." "Let it go? Like you did with my mother? Like you did with me?" Jamal's anger flared, spilling into his words. "You left her with nothing. Blacklisted her from this industry because she wouldn't disappear the way you wanted. And now you think I'll stay silent?" Richard's jaw clenched, the polished CEO mask slipping just slightly. "I made decisions I had to make, Jamal. It was a different time." "For you, maybe," Jamal shot back, his voice thick with pain. "You went on with your life, built this empire, created a perfect image. But for us? You left us to pick up the pieces. My mother sacrificed everything for me, while you just forgot we existed." Richard looked away, his fingers gripping the desk edge. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, with a touch of regret. "I didn't forget. I had a family and a reputation to protect. There was no room for mistakes." "Mistakes?" Jamal's words felt like they burned his throat. "You call me and my mother a mistake? She lost her career because of you, and I spent my whole life wondering who you were, thinking maybe you had a reason. But the truth is, you just didn't care." Richard exhaled slowly, his expression clouded. "Jamal, it's not as simple as you think. There were complications. Choices I had to make, even if they weren't easy." Jamal shook his head, the anger and hurt finally bubbling over. "You don't get to pretend you're the victim here. You chose the easy way out. You walked away, then crushed her when she refused to let you erase us." Richard remained silent, his face pale. Jamal saw the struggle in his eyes, the thin veneer of control barely holding. But at that moment, he no longer cared about his father's excuses. "I looked up to you," Jamal said, voice trembling. "I worked my whole life to get here, thinking I was following in the footsteps of someone worth admiring. But you're just a coward." Richard's expression finally faltered, and he looked down, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm sorry, Jamal. I didn't know it would come to this." Jamal stared at him, the apology feeling hollow and meaningless. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. You don't get to erase what you did to my mother, to me. I didn't come here for an apology. I came here to make sure you finally face the truth." Richard looked up, his face ashen. For once, he had no response, no carefully crafted excuse. Jamal could see the weight of the words settling on him, but it didn't change anything. His mother's sacrifices and the years of hardship couldn't be erased by a few words. Jamal took a step back, the reality settling in. "You're not my family. My mother raised me without you, without your money or power, and I don't need anything from you. I'm here in spite of you, not because of you." With one last look, Jamal turned and walked out of the office. The weight he'd carried for years felt lighter, the anger slowly lifting as he left behind the man who had tried to erase them. Bookmark. As he exited the building, the city air felt crisp. the world seeming brighter somehow. Jamal knew he had finally taken back his story, his truth. He didn't need Richard Collins or his approval. He had his mother's strength, his own resilience, and the knowledge that he was more than just the legacy of a man who had abandoned him. For the first time, Jamal felt free to create his own future, defined by the love and courage he had seen in his mother. As Jamal stepped out of Collins Industries, he felt an immense weight lift off his shoulders. He had finally confronted Anthony Collins and made it clear that the man couldn't hide from his past anymore. Jamal didn't need his father's approval, wealth, or excuses. What he needed was something he'd had all along: Amelia's love, sacrifice, and unwavering support. When he got home, he found his mother waiting at the kitchen table, her eyes a mixture of pride and worry. She rose as he walked in, trying to keep her face calm, though he could sense the tension she carried. "How did it go, Jamal?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern. Jamal sat down beside her, taking her hand in his and meeting her gaze. "I told him everything I needed to say, Mom. He tried to give excuses and said he was protecting himself, but he's never really been sorry for what he did. It was all about keeping up his image." Amelia's hand tightened around his, and her face softened. "I'm so sorry, Jamal. I never wanted you to have to bear this burden. If you feel that moving on is the best thing, then I'm right here with you." Jamal gave her a small smile, nodding. "Mom, I know now that I don't need anything from him. I don't need his approval or his apology. Everything I am, everything I've achieved is because of you." His voice softened. "You raised me with so much love and strength. That's what matters." Amelia's eyes shone with pride as she listened, her hand trembling slightly as she held his. "Jamal, from the moment you were born, I knew we would make it through anything. You are the greatest gift I could have ever asked for." Jamal's chest felt light for the first time in days. "I realize now that every accomplishment, every goal I've reached was because of what you taught me, not because of him. I finally understand what really matters." Amelia brushed a hand through his hair, her face filled with love and pride. They sat in silence for a moment, their hearts full, feeling a sense of peace they hadn't felt in years. The pain from the past no longer felt as heavy. In the days that followed, Jamal submitted his resignation to Collins Industries. Leaving wasn't just about breaking away from Anthony's shadow, but also about stepping into a future that was truly his. He didn't need to work for the man who had abandoned them to prove himself. He wanted to build a career that was all his own, free from the weight of the past. Jamal decided to pursue work in a field he genuinely felt passionate about. He began looking for positions with companies whose core values aligned with his own integrity, resilience, and compassion, qualities his mother had instilled in him. During his search, he took on freelance work and became involved in local community projects, something that gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He used his skills to help others who had faced tough times, even organizing workshops for young people with backgrounds similar to his own, inspiring them not to give up on their dreams. One evening, Jamal returned home to find Amelia waiting by the window, a warm smile on her face. He walked through the door, excitement radiating from him. "Mom, I got the job. It's at the company I really wanted." Amelia threw her arms around him, her face glowing with joy and relief. "I knew you'd do it, Jamal. You always make me so proud." Jamal hugged her back, grateful for everything she had given him. "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Amelia looked at him, her eyes filled with love and hope. "You're the reason I never gave up. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy." They sat together, talking about Jamal's new role and his hopes for the future. In that peaceful moment, they knew they had finally found freedom from the past. All that remained was the love and strength they shared, a bond that had survived every hardship. Jamal began his new job with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Each morning, as he walked through the doors of his new workplace, he knew he was on a path he had chosen for himself, free from the legacy of Collins Industries and his father's shadow. The company's values aligned closely with his own, and his role allowed him to work on projects that truly made a difference. Mentorship programs, community outreach, and initiatives focused on empowering underserved communities. He threw himself into his work, eager to prove himself and make an impact. His colleagues quickly noticed his dedication and his genuine passion for helping others. One project, in particular, became close to his heart, a program supporting young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to build skills and confidence for future careers. Jamal felt a deep connection to these young people, knowing firsthand the challenges they faced. During an introductory workshop, Jamal shared a bit of his own story. He didn't delve into all the painful details, but he spoke about overcoming obstacles and the importance of resilience. The young participants listened intently, and he could see the hope in their eyes. Many of them were dealing with broken homes, difficult relationships, or financial struggles, and Jamal's message of perseverance resonated with them. After the session, a young girl approached him. She looked up at him with wide, determined eyes and asked, "Do you really think people like us can make it, no matter what happens?" Jamal smiled, seeing himself reflected in her gaze. "I know you can. Life might throw challenges your way, but what matters is how you face them. Stay true to yourself and don't let anyone define what you're capable of achieving." The weeks turned into months, and Jamal continued to find fulfillment in his work. The more he invested himself in the community, the more he realized that his mother, Amelia, had given him a foundation far stronger than any legacy his father could have offered. Her values of kindness, perseverance, and integrity became the principles that guided him in everything he did. At home, Amelia watched her son flourish with a heart full of pride and peace. Their once small apartment felt brighter, not because of material changes, but because they had both found a new sense of freedom. Every evening, Jamal would share his stories with her, describing the young lives he was impacting and the new dreams he was helping others build. One evening as they prepared dinner, Amelia looked over at him, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. "Jamal, you've become everything I ever dreamed for you. You're a man with a purpose, and I am so grateful to see you so fulfilled." Jamal paused, the weight of her words filling him with gratitude. "Mom, I wouldn't be here without you. I'm just following the example you set. Everything good in me came from you." Amelia took his hand, smiling through tears. "And you've taken that goodness and made it even brighter. You're changing lives, Jamal. You're living proof that no matter where we come from, we can build something meaningful." Months later, Jamal received an unexpected call. A well-regarded organization had heard about his work and invited him to join a national advisory board for youth empowerment. The opportunity was huge, giving him a platform to advocate for young people on a larger scale. Excitedly, he shared the news with Amelia, who beamed with joy, tears of pride shining in her eyes. "I always knew you were meant for great things, Jamal," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is just the beginning." Jamal hugged her tightly, feeling her warmth and support surround him. "Mom, I hope everything I do makes you proud. This isn't just for me, it's for us. For the life you gave me, for all the sacrifices you made." Amelia touched his cheek, her voice soft but full of conviction. "You make me proud every single day, Jamal. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy and to know your worth. And now you're showing others their worth too." The night before his first meeting with the advisory board, Jamal sat down to write his opening remarks. He reflected on his journey, the challenges he had overcome, and the people who had shaped his life, especially his mother. She had been his foundation, his guide, and his greatest source of strength. In his speech, he spoke about resilience, the power of believing in oneself, and the importance of a strong support system. He shared a story of his own experiences without mentioning his father by name, but spoke about the strength he had gained from the love and guidance of his mother. As he finished writing, he felt a sense of closure. He had moved beyond the need for validation from anyone but himself and the people who truly mattered to him. He knew now that his journey wasn't about proving anything to his father or seeking revenge. It was about creating a life of meaning, fueled by the values Amelia had instilled in him. The next day, as he stepped into the conference room and addressed a crowd of leaders and young people, he spoke from the heart. His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations and inspiring hope. When he looked around at the faces in the room, he saw a future filled with possibility. A future where he was free to define his own path. As the years went on, Jamal and Amelia built a life they were both proud of, one defined not by their struggles, but by their resilience, love, and integrity. Jamal's career continued to grow as he became a leading voice in youth empowerment, advocating for those who face challenges like his own. With every speech he gave, every young person he inspired, and every project he led, he carried with him the strength Amelia had instilled in him. Amelia, too, found a new place in her life. She saw the incredible man her son had become, a man who held on to his values no matter the hardships he faced. She realized that, despite everything, she had created a legacy far stronger than wealth or social standing, a legacy of character, compassion, and courage. Jamal no longer saw his father's actions as the center of his life's story. Instead, he saw his mother's sacrifices, her guidance, and her love as the foundation of everything he had achieved. The journey had not been easy, but it had led them both to a place of peace, purpose, and fulfillment. And that was something no one could take away. Lesson and takeaway. The story of Jamal and Amelia teaches us that our past does not have to define our future. It's a story about overcoming betrayal, rising above hardship, and finding strength in the people who truly support us. Jamal's journey shows us the power of resilience and the importance of self-worth, how we can take control of our lives and redefine ourselves, regardless of where we come from or who might have let us down. In Amelia, we see the unconditional love and sacrifice of a mother, a reminder that sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave isn't material wealth or status, but the values we pass down. She taught Jamal not only how to survive, but how to thrive, with honesty, compassion, and inner strength. A call to action for the audience. If this story moved you, think about the people who have supported you, believed in you, and helped you become who you are today. Let them know how much they mean to you, and if you're able, pay it forward. There's someone out there who needs to hear your story of resilience, who could be inspired by your journey, just as Jamal inspired others. If you've ever felt held back by someone else's choices, remember that your future is still in your hands. Embrace the strength within you. Make decisions that reflect your values, and don't let the past dictate your potential. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Take a moment to reflect on someone who's helped you, believed in you, or shown you the strength you needed. Share your gratitude with them, or, if you're comfortable, share your story with us in the comments below. If you've ever felt the weight of your past or been held back by others, know that your future is yours to shape. Embrace your resilience, surround yourself with those who lift you up, and commit to being that support for others, too. Press 1 if you believe in the power of resilience and overcoming challenges. Press 2 if you've had someone in your life, like Amelia, who's been a rock for you. Let's build a community of strength, gratitude, and support, because together, we're unstoppable.